Hey, this is one class you don't want to cut. Networking 101. You know, we're looking at our networking cable out there today. One of the most common standards that we see is Cat5e, right? We've been using it for years. A lot of times, even I still catch myself when I'm looking at new Power over Ethernet. I'll say, does it work on Cat5e? But right now, the latest standard is the Cat6 stuff out there. So the difference between the two is really comes down to megahertz, is what it really amounts to. Cat5e is rated for 100 megahertz. Cat6 is actually rated for 200 megahertz. It's double the performance. But what does that really mean? Does that mean it's important enough to go rip out all this Cat5e cable? Not really. Cat5 should actually last in a wall for about 10 to 12 years, about a good lifespan for Cat5. Now, most time it stays in there a whole lot longer. But it really is kind of pushing its limits when you're approaching 1 gigabit. And what happens is that we got a standard that says we can have 100 meters of cable here, right? So if I'm transmitting something over here at station A and I'm receiving it at station B, by the time that signal travels down, look at Pac-Man, how cool. By the time it travels down to this other end, that signal starts to lose a little bit of its power down here. And what we have in these twisted pair wires is they kind of bleed over. They kind of talk. You could hear that talk kind of bleed over from one pair of wires to the other, and we call that crosstalk. Now, it's not so bad here at the strong end because I got a really strong signal, but as I move further down the cable, that far end crosstalk is actually the right term, gets pretty darn bad. And that's really how we determine the length of this cable, is that when our crosstalk won't pass anymore, then that's where we got to cut it off. Cat6, being that 200 megahertz, it actually is going to give you a lot better resolution. You're going to have a lot higher signal to noise ratio, so you don't have a lot of those crosstalk issues at the far end when you start transmitting and running at higher speeds, 10 gigabit, 40 gigabit. Well, 40 gigabit's not rated on copper yet, but you never know. The 10 gigabit certainly stuff is, and I definitely would recommend going Cat6 on that. But there's a couple things that kind of concern me when people talk about this. A lot of folks like to use the term impedance matching and balancing when it comes to Cat6. If you're looking at putting Cat6 on your network, understand this, that Cat6 has no impedance requirements whatsoever. You can't impedance match it because there's not anything in the standard that says what you line that up to. Also, when it comes to balancing out a cable, electrically balancing that cable, what the most important thing that you need to make sure is that your lines are all twisted, that the inside of that cable, that the copper wire is all twisted at the same rate, at the same length, and at the same twist per inch. That's how it's actually rated, and that's how they electrically balance that stuff, is that it's all twisted at the same length all the way up and down that cable, and then it's electrically balanced. Don't pay extra for somebody to say they got to do that and tune it. That's just silly. That's impossible. That's done when it's manufactured, and it's definitely important to look at. I would say if you're going to get new cable installed today, absolutely do not get Cat5e installed. Pay the extra premium, it's about 20% extra, and go with the Cat6. It's going to provide you a lot better performance and a lot better life. Also, I know that if you've messed with Cat6 before, you've probably felt that it's really stiff and it's rigid. Back when we first started making Cat6, we had to put a spline down there so we could separate the pairs, so we could actually keep that crosstalk I talked about here down at 200 megahertz. Well, we found out by actually adding more twist to the line, we could keep that down without making the cable so stiff. So if you've kind of backed away from it because it's really stiff, check it out again because it's definitely a lot better. That is the most important thing to remember about Cat5. E and Cat6, lot better resolution, lot better bandwidth. If you're going to install new stuff, definitely make sure it's always Cat6.